After a brilliant reception from the players to Infinite World, step by step turned into what promised to be the next generation of Dragon Ball games. Many games were highlighted. They accompany many in their childhood, some of whom we have not yet spoken on the channel, but have generated an incredible impact on the development of the games of this iconic manga, for the good or for the bad. That golden age of which many proudly claim to have been a part of at their time. However, the year is 2008. It is time to turn the page, and with the best of allies, DIMS, a developer which until now had remained almost undefeated with a memorable saga of games. It was time to take the next step. It was time to start with Burst Limit. Developed by DIMS, continues the saga of Budokai games on Xbox 360 and PS3. Let's do it! Show a lot of support for the video if you would like to continue watching reviews of related games. What if this time we reach 200 likes? Here you have it, the last and special chapter of what was Burst Limit in the final straight of the Budokai. It is the year 2008, June 5th to be precise, and for the prestigious consoles of the moment a hopeful game will arrive, the first Dragon Ball game to come to Xbox 360 and PS3. From the intro of the game you can see a subtle but very relevant hint that leads to the iconic moments that the developers let us experience in Infinite World, something that lets us see behind the scenes that many of the creative ideas that the DIMS team had introduced for Infinite World were also implemented here at Burst Limit. Remember that there is only a time difference of 5 months between the launch of these two games. However, both its launch and its reception by the players were abysmally different. Arriving on Xbox 360 and PS3, what was at the time the new generation of consoles, the graphics section shows a pretty large improvement with respect to what we've seen before. Even when Infinite World demonstrates the maximum capabilities of a graphic engine on PS2, Burst Limit continues to stand out for its visual section and its new power on these consoles. Burst Limit even has a soundtrack that is very matching the jazz and celebrity tones of Infinite World. A lot of the developers' work was basically replicated in a next generation version, which they expected or wanted to believe would be better. The art of the game from the moment we enter the main menu denotes the intention of showing a new style, rooted to the manga volumes with these renderings of characters with original art for the game. But more than giving a sense of identification with the manga or even with the anime, it seems more a cartoon style of a North American trend. It's not a negative point, but it is an element that I think it was interesting to highlight. The main game mode, and which is already considered a standard in Dragon Ball games, is Chronicle C, the typical story mode that we all know with a very simple chapter segmentation. This can detach extra scenes, which would be additional battles where different perspectives are shown of the fights we already overcome. The story begins with the Saiyan Saga, typical, and shows more than any other game mode the new graphic capabilities of this title. Facial expressions, the stages, and the effects are much more polished. However, with all of its new aspects, I feel it was wasted. Certain parts of the story in terms of cinematics and interaction, I feel them a little lazy. Not to say crowy. It seems like something you do to get out of the way when you are short in time. At least that's the feeling it gives me. Not to mention the numerous occasions where I saw recycled material. Really, a lot of recycled material in practically every scene of every chapter. However, the game has very well executed scenes like the crash between Goku and Vegeta in the Saiyan Saga, representations that have been seen few times, so well trimmed in a game engine. Between dialogues and cinematics arrives what presents some problems and in the combat system, without nothing especially bad which to highlight, but with details that did not finally fit in all well in the philosophy of game stipulated before. It is not that it has not been worked enough, but I think that the decisions made by the creative team to give a satisfactory, entertaining gameplay sense with deep mechanics to give a pleasant kinesthetic sensation were not correct, and you can say that put any person to play the first level of this game. The controls are friendly, yes, but the feeling of the game is something apparatus because of this scenario with so shallow depth of field, movements that apply the same blur and a camera perspective that it was constantly shuddering, giving a misaligned sense of control. Do you notice that everything is blurry? Well, welcome to Burst Limit. We will talk more in depth about the combat mechanics and their changes with respect to what we already knew. For now, let's continue with the story mode. If there is something interesting to establish here, it is the relationship between characters and the story that we are overcoming, due to the reduction in the roster of characters compared to past occasions. The events where said characters were supposed to appear were removed and several important facts in the story mode were skipped. To top it off, the story focuses only up to the Cell Saga, which I don't know if it became fashion, a kind of trend among the developers of Dragon Ball games, something that keep driving them to continue making these games. They didn't want to put all the complete sagas in. This was something that was never well received and they keep doing it. It was like a step backwards. With the first Budokai, it was understandable. We are talking about a problem of software limitations with the maximum capacity in the beginnings of the PS2, but we were talking about a PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, we had already been through that. At least Broly and Bardock have their participations with their Duke chapters to make the glass half full. As we already said, the feeling of gameplay took a step backwards, and I'm not saying it, it is said by the impressions of the most faithful players of the Budokai Saga when they saw what they did to the frame data of the game and the sudden changes in perspective. But it is also important to talk about these new additions that created this similar game system but with failures that seem to have already been overcome. First, we have the changes in the aura, a spec that had several unbalanced problems in Infinite World, but here it would be notably different, being only possible to activate it when our ki is at maximum, also giving additional advantages like our ki burst would now be charged burst in this state. Our attacks had devastating chains, and here is the addition of a minigame where you press as many buttons as possible to win the clash and thus you would end up doing more damage. Ki is now managed differently, it cannot be charged at pleasure but it generates gradually during the fight. It can be used with actions that, although they do not look the same, if they work in the same way we saw in the Budokai game's path. Damage cancellation, launch blow, something similar to Dragon Rush, among others. The beam struggles returned with a pretty pleasant execution both visually and mechanically, simple and direct as it had always worked, an element that was missed in Infinite World. The game also features stage changes which feel like a very dynamic and fun transition instead of forced. A very important inclusion would also be the drama fragments or drama scenes as you prefer to call them, some actions that could be activated at certain moments of the fight to give support to the fighters as additional support animations. This was achieved automatically when certain requirements were met in the combat. This was good in story, but in versus battles it was a nightmare, an item that could practically save your opponent from sure death. The number of characters was greatly reduced, being only 21 playable characters, and this being the starting point which would also welcome new players in the new generation. It did not feel good at all. A very important reduction in the variety of characters, which, yes, it includes the great most of iconic characters that we all want to see in Dragon Ball, but do not expect us to praise the variety of your new game when in previous deliveries we got to see up to almost 10 times the number of characters you feature here. The combat in its style doesn't feel bad at all, it is a very entertaining with adrenaline moments of quite a mind game, strategy and even luck, but not guided by irrelevant mechanics like rock, paper, scissors, but with small details like the amount of ki you can withstand in this state to continue a combo, or if you are able to counter a rival attack with the resources you have remaining. The combos feel great when they come out the way you taught them. The special attacks are easier to perform and provides a tremendous reduction between what is an experienced player and a beginner. That was the intent, that was the purpose of this game. Despite its failures, it was not any far from a poorly received game. In fact, it was nominated for several awards in 2008 and became a hit on PlayStation 3. However, when you ask a fan of Dragon Ball games, most of the times they would not compare Burst Limit with what Budokai Tenkaichi 3 or Infinite World made them feel, for example. It is a game which time has not favored, and it has been unmasking how little innovative it turned out to be. Something sincerely undeserved, and for this reason, Dragon Ball Z Burst Limit was the unfair ending to the Budokai Games saga. It has been a total pleasure for me to bring you these reviews, many more will be coming soon, I can't wait to share more game experiences with you, and I will always thank you. Guys, that was all for today, Take care and see ya!